to see the open racism in the way that they behave and they operate, and also to see the weakness as well in their eyes, because when they hold a gun into your face and you don't cower, they don't really have anything beyond that. All they have is violence and intimidation. They always just scale up the violence, and you take their guns away and they don't have anything. That's an impression I got personally. But I do notice, as being part of the Global Smooth Flotilla, that something has changed on a societal level, I think, in terms of people's perception of the Palestinian struggle.
Hello and welcome. I'm Osama Nazal. Today we are honored to welcome Tag Hickey, a passionate advocate for human rights and a fearless supporter of Palestine. Tag has made waves internationally through his participation in the Gaza Smooth Flotilla, standing up against injustice and amplifying the voices of those under occupation. But his activism doesn't stop there. Tag uniquely combines his love for comedy with his commitment to human rights and justice, using humor to educate, inspire, and challenge audiences around the world. In this interview, we will explore his journey, his extraordinary courage, and the ways in which he leverages laughter and storytelling to fight for justice. Most welcome to the program, Tag.
Thank you, brother. It's an absolute honor to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Tag, we know that the Smooth Flotilla was not an easy mission at all, and we were all aware of the dangers because we know who the enemy is. The Israeli occupation does not respect any human rights and the human values when it comes to supporting Palestine. So what inspired you to be part of that flotilla?
Well, I suppose, as you kindly said in your introduction, I've been trying to use my satire, my comedy, to raise awareness about what is going on in Gaza and in the West Bank, and the horrors therein, the injustices therein. And I've been involved in organising marches and direct actions in Ireland over the last 2 years, but I was just so bitterly frustrated and bewildered that all my actions, all my colleagues' actions seem to have changed nothing on the ground in Gaza. There was no material difference at all, and our governments in the West were still, I would say, to say complicit is to let them off the hook. They are assisting the mass extermination. They are assisting the man-made starvation. And so out of desperation, actually, I signed up to go on the Global Smooth Flotilla because I have young kids. I didn't want to leave them. I didn't want to leave my partner for weeks on end with young kids. My youngest child, when I left, was 16 weeks old. And I have no experience on boats, but that's the level of desperation I felt in the build-up. And then people who were going and organising felt that I would be useful in terms of hopefully my ability to communicate and the video content. So that's why I found myself going. It's not something that I wanted to do, or I certainly wasn't going for clicks or notoriety, as some Western journalists like to frame these expeditions as selfie yachts. It was nothing like that. It was an act of desperation that turned into an act of solidarity, and I certainly had an experience that the Palestine Solidarity Movement is worldwide now. There was activists from all over the world, and the passion and dedication they showed to this cause definitely did something for my heart and my soul.
Yes, tell us about the moment you witnessed and you won't forget. Maybe when the Israeli occupation forces attacked your ship, and I think you were the first one to be held, to be detained by the Israeli occupiers from the boat you were on board. So if you tell us about your experience and about these first moments, especially you mentioned that you left behind an infant. So tell us about all these human feelings and emotions that haunted your mind when the Israelis attacked your ship.
Well, I just want to begin, I would preface whatever I say by saying that, and it's not just a mantra, it is a fact, that whatever we experienced is just a tiny glimpse of what Palestinians face every single day, both in the West Bank and in Gaza, at the hands of this occupation. So I realise, and I'm very much aware of my privilege when I say that we had unpleasant experiences, we had scary experiences, And for a Western audience, I think they're quite shocking. But we are also cognizant that what we experienced is nothing compared to what Palestinians experience. But even before so-called interception, which is really a kidnapping because we're in international waters and completely legal what we're doing, we're also entering Palestinian waters. We had no business in Israel whatsoever. We were headed for Gaza on a humanitarian mission. So for us to be intercepted is actually kidnapping, and it's important to note that. But we had already been under drone attacks when we were in Tunisia. We were under bombs, under fire when we were off the coast of Greece. So for people to say, some people in the media have said, sure, we knew what we were getting ourselves into when we entered a war zone. Unless people think that the war zone extends to Greece, we were nowhere near Palestine or so-called Israel when we were under attack weeks before. But as you say, after about 5.5 or 6 weeks at sea and about 50 nautical miles outside Gaza, my boat was an early boat to be intercepted, and I was one of the lucky ones because the commandos that came on my boat were young. They were mostly reservists, I would say, I'm guessing, but they didn't treat us with the level of disdain that other participants and friends of mine had. There was some boats where the commandos came on, cable tied them, forced them to sit in the breaking sun in the morning, forced them to look towards Tel Aviv and genuflect to the so-called capital of the Middle East, is the way they described it. So it just seemed to be how psychopathic or how under the influence of amphetamines the commandos would determine what kind of treatment you were going to get. The treatment that we got was relatively okay. Again, we're being kidnapped though in international waters. Our boats being commandeered and we're being forced to go to Israel. And then I can obviously go on. As soon as we got to Ashdod, the treatment completely changed, and I personally was treated, I felt very much like I was some sort of wanted terrorist, manhandled off the boat. My head was down towards the ground, my arms were in the air, and I felt like because I was Irish, I was probably treated a little bit like the Arabs and the Palestinians. I think in terms of the European context, the Irish would be a particular source of ire for the Israelis because they know how much that the Irish support the Palestinians, and in Ashdod we were treated accordingly in their perspective that we are the terrorists and not them. The people trying to bring baby formula to Gaza were treated like terrorists, and the people kidnapping humanitarians in international waters are apparently the good guys in accordance with the Western perspective on this so-called conflict.
Yeah, and Tak, how long did you spend in the Israeli detention centers? And if you tell us how your experience was enriched concerning the suffering of the Palestinian prisoners, who some of them spent decades and decades in the Israeli occupation dungeons.
Yes, exactly. So we spent 5 or 6 hours at Ashdod, cable tied, forced to sit in certain positions, and if you didn't, you would be reprimanded. I personally was hit several times in the head because I would raise my head to offer solidarity to other comrades who would be verbally or in some cases physically assaulted. And after we were processed, we were brought to Kitziyot prison. So to be fair to Ben Gavir, he kept his promise. He announced to the international community that he was going to send us to what he described as terrorist prison, and incredibly that's what he did. And he brought us to Kitziyot, and I spent 3 or 4, I think 4 days in total, including Ashdod and the prison. And in those 4 days I never spoke to a lawyer. I didn't have access to any medicines if I needed medicines, no access to doctors. There was no clean water. We were told to drink the water in our prison cells, effectively toilet water that was contaminated and brown. When we raised our concerns and then got really, I suppose, shirty, and there was almost an all-out riot on my wing because they were denying insulin to one of our Irish comrades, Paddy Kelly, who's in his 70s. It was really dangerous, obviously, for somebody not to be given their insulin, and instead of bringing us a doctor for Paddy, they brought in their SWAT teams and told us that they didn't have any doctors for animals. So that's the way they treated humanitarians in international waters, trying to just break this illegal, immoral siege. We had no business with Israel. we just wanted to go to Gaza, and we were treated, I was going to say like common criminals, but actually common criminals would get a phone call out, they would get some time in the yard. We got none of those things. I had no contact with the outside world whatsoever for the 3 or 4 days, and my family understandably were very, very worried. And as I told you earlier, I have a very young family. And so what I kept thinking was, if they're going to treat me with the passport I have, if they're going to treat Greta Thunberg, one of the most famous people in the world, like this, imagine what they're doing to Palestinians behind closed doors when they don't have anyone to advocate for them and they don't have a passport that will strike some degree of fear into the minds of these completely psychopathic, drunk on their own impunity bullies that the Israelis were. So my heart and my mind and my soul goes out to the Palestinians who are in those dungeons, as you say, right now as we speak, and the international community is doing little to nothing to get them out.
Yes, and Taik, do you notice that there is a difference with regard to your message to the world, to the international community, to the solidarity movement, the message before this experience and after? Do you feel there is any difference, any new thing you got from this experience when it comes to your message to the world concerning the suffering of the Palestinian people under occupation and the Palestinian prisoners? We saw and heard the stories of the prisoners lately released by Israel, how much they were tortured, the horrors that go through inside the Israeli prisons.
I'm not sure if my own personal opinion has changed that much, because I was quite dedicated to the Palestinian cause anyway, having experienced the Israelis up close and personal, and to see the sadism, I think, in their eyes, to see the open racism in the way that they behave and they operate, and also to see the weakness as well in their eyes, because when they hold a gun into your face and you don't cower, they don't really have anything beyond that. All they have is violence and intimidation. They always just scale up the violence, and you take their guns away and they don't have anything. That's an impression I got personally. But I do notice, as being part of the Global Smooth Flotilla, that something has changed on a societal level, I think, in terms of people's perception of the Palestinian struggle. Maybe it took some Western faces, maybe it took some white people to describe just what they're like, I think, when you experience them up close and personal. And now many people in Ireland that perhaps weren't always engaged in the Palestinian cause are now irate, I think, really angry and really disturbed that Ireland has a fairly normal diplomatic relationship with this country that treats its citizens with this level of brutality and callousness. And I think a lot of Irish people are waking up to the fact that some of the people who treated us the way they did over the course of the week or whatnot that we were in so-called Israel, those people can travel to Ireland without a visa. Yet we can't get kids from the West Bank to come over to Ireland and play our national sport, as we tried to do in the case of GAA Palestine. They were denied their visas by the Irish state. So maybe it took white people to be affected, and I'm very happy to be a conduit, for our stories to be a conduit to the real stories, which, as you say, are the Palestinians being incarcerated and tortured as we speak. Something about the Global Smooth Flotilla brought the Palestinian cause, the Palestinian torture, the Palestinian pain to the doorstep of Western countries. And I think that is a massive success for the movement, because now it feels like the whole world is awake and alive to the just unspeakable injustices and atrocities that this rogue, apartheid, racist state carries out.
Yeah, and you're a comedian and a storyteller. Did you use comedy and storytelling while you were on board with your comrades and your friends to change maybe the mood, to have some humor? If you tell us about that.
Yeah, I suppose the best example I can give you of that is I spent a good couple of weeks with Greta Thunberg, who I'm not sure how the world has kind of come up with its opinion of what she's like. I mean, if you were to listen to Donald Trump, she's apparently an angry young lady, but actually she's got so much levity. She's extremely funny, razor sharp. And we devised a couple of comedy sketches while we were together to kind of sum up the world's paltry perspective on the Palestinian struggle and the hypocrisy of it. So we made some comedy sketches together, and one of them went crazy viral. I think it's got 10 million views on Instagram, and she's absolutely brilliant in it. And then there were other days where my background would be a little bit of music as well. There were other days where we devised some songs. So for instance, the occupation would sometimes jam our communications, and they'd play Bob Marley and they'd play ABBA because of their unhealthy obsession with Greta Thunberg. Again, they referenced ABBA because I think just like ABBA are Swedish. So myself and Leila Hagazi, who's an amazing musician who was on board with me, we devised some kind of comedy songs to satirize the Israeli propaganda machine. It's a means of keeping myself sane, but I also really felt during the experience on the flotilla what the utility of being the clown is. That's what I see myself as, I suppose, a clown, just to add levity, just to keep people sane. And also it's the Palestinians, I should say, it's my Palestinian friends who have encouraged me more than anyone to use humor, to use satire in this moment, because it just has this capacity to reach people in a way that me talking to the camera and being straight and being earnest and being honest, it just doesn't ever reach people in the way that jokes can. And I really definitely have seen the power of satire these days, that I now have people all around the world messaging me saying, keep doing what you're doing. The kind of message is getting out there, the information is getting out there through the medium of satires. I feel very fortunate to have the skill set that I hopefully do have at this moment of absolute crisis. I think not just for Palestine, but actually for the world.
Yes, and it's like how difficult it is to employ humor and comedy to express a struggle as serious as Palestine's. We are talking about a really tragedy, about a catastrophe. So how can you manifest and express this struggle through laughter and the humor? Don't you think it's rather complicated?
Of course. I mean, I would differentiate between humor and comedy and then satire. So yeah. I personally haven't done any stand-up comedy in the last couple of years. I find it really hard to do it. I find it hard to stand up on a stage and just make jokes. I'm not in any way judging people that do, because some people manage to do stand-up comedy and it has a satirical kind of underpinning to it, or they're making jokes, you know, not about the state of the world at all, and they're making people laugh and they're offering distraction, and that's brilliant. I struggle with that. I would probably see myself as a satirist more than a comedian, and I think satire is needed now more than ever, because the satire that I grew up reading and watching on TV, I mean, if you even go to the kind of pioneers of satire, to use a famous Irish example, Jonathan Swift. Jonathan Swift's kind of use of satire was to speak truth to power and to look at the powerful systems that operate in Ireland and around the world and to make a joke of them, to ridicule them, so that people will look at them again and think, well, maybe they're not so powerful. Maybe we can reconsider our fidelity to them, and maybe we can challenge them, and ultimately maybe we can bring them down. That's the point of satire for me. A British satirist who I adore, Chris Morris, has said this before in interviews, where if humor or comedy or satire isn't provoking change, isn't provoking people to look at the system that they're living under and to want to move to something better, then it doesn't have any purpose at all. And I kind of agree with that. So I don't think we've ever been in a time where satire is more needed, because the power structures that rule us all, particularly in the West, I think we really see now how hypocritical they are, how racist they are, how oppressive they are, and how they don't serve the people. And this, I think, is evidenced by the fact that all over the West, we're seeing the ordinary person rally behind the Palestinian cause, be absolutely outraged and appalled at the video evidence that we're seeing on our phones every day of what's happening to Palestinians, even after this so-called ceasefire, which isn't a ceasefire at all, as you know better than I know. It's anything but a ceasefire. And because the people are really behind the Palestinian cause, we can see the governments, which don't serve the people at all, really trying to rally behind the Zionist cause for corporatist reasons, for financial reasons. So never has there been a better time, I think, for satire to be really strong and clear And I'd like to think that the type of satire I do, I don't worry about the consequences. It's more important to me to be just and authentic in what I'm doing, and good satire really tries to challenge power, and that's what I'm hopefully doing these days and will continue to do. I can promise my friends in the global majority that that's what I will be doing.
Yeah, you mentioned the ceasefire, but during the ceasefire, Israel killed more than 96 Palestinians and injured hundreds others, destroyed many houses, especially yesterday. So we are not talking about full ceasefire, as Israel violates that all the time. And this leads me to the question about the international solidarity movement. What do you expect for this international movement? Do you think that the momentum it has is going to be down in light of the ceasefire? Or today the activist and the world is much convinced that it is not a matter of a battle or one aggression by the Israeli occupation. It's a matter of liberation, and we have to maintain the momentum of the movement and continue activism against occupation.
I think that's such an interesting question, and I do think we're at a moment in the movement right now where the weaker people, the kind of what you would say are decaffeinated revolutionaries, will want to walk away from the Palestinian cause right now, because the world is telling them, that the mainstream media is telling them, Donald Trump is telling them, there's a peace deal, everyone's going to be happy, Tony Blair is going to be the viceroy of Gaza, and we can all sleep well at night. So those of us with a brain and a soul in the West or anywhere in the world, any ally of the Palestinians anywhere, needs to make sure that we get the message out there that the idea of a ceasefire is a laughing stock. I was in Lebanon, for instance, last February when there was a so-called ceasefire that was going on since the previous November, and there were bombs flying over my head. I visited a town in South Lebanon, and about 6 or 7 hours later, that town was bombed. We know now, and we know historically, that Israel doesn't cease firing ever. That's something that we need to be really clear about, because we won't see much mention of it in the mainstream media, that there is no peace deal whatsoever. And so it's very important not just to make sure that we remind people that the genocide actually hasn't stopped at all, but that what do we want for the Palestinian cause? We've come this far for the last couple of years. Do we simply want the guns to fall silent, for no more bombs to drop? That would be the absolute bare minimum of what we're wanting and what we're demanding. If there is to be any kind of peace deal, then that peace deal has to be centered on Palestinian self-determination. How anybody could get excited about Trump's 20-point peace plan when it doesn't actually allow for any Palestinian self-determination, when it's effectively trying to tell Palestinians who will run Gaza in the future, how on earth could that be a peace deal? It's pure, absolute, naked colonialism and imperialism is what it is. So I think the movement needs to refresh itself, and it needs to become a little bit clearer and refocus on what we're doing this for. We're providing allyship to the Palestinians as they journey towards liberation and justice, and we need to see the war criminals, not just in Israel, but their backers all over Europe, particularly in the mainstream media. We need to see them face their day in court. Frankly, they need to see justice. So yeah, a recalibration is what's in order, I think. Rather than falling away, we'd actually need to strengthen what we're doing and refocus.
Yes, and Tag, my final question to you, if you want to express the last scene of the American president addressing the Israeli Knesset, talking about the end of a 3,000-year conflict, peace is dominant today from his own perspective. If you want to express the scene in a satirical way, how would you do that?
That's a good question. That sounds like a challenge, to be honest. Well, I mean, in terms of a satirical image, I see Trump speaking to his own people and speaking to a handful of Zionists. And then I see the rest of the world and the Palestinians in another room. in another place completely, because he's not speaking to Palestinians, he's not speaking with Palestinians, and he's certainly not speaking for Palestinians. So while the sane and the soulful all around the world, and the Palestinians, which, let's remember, this is what this conflict, so-called conflict, is about. It's about Palestine. It's about Palestinians, for them not to be consulted and for them to be told in the midst of their own, actually on a brief pause in their own genocide, who and how they're going to rule their own country. I think if it wasn't so miserably racist and orientalist, it would be laughable. So maybe there is room for some satire for me to do on it.
Taig, it has been a great pleasure having you on our program. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Absolute honor. Thank you.
Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for watching. And from you, Osama Nazal, have a nice time.